Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Today we are joined by Chad Holmes, Security Evangelist at Cynerio. Webinar Wednesday, we would like to thank our sponsor, Cynerio. Cynerio has one simple goal: to secure every IoT, IoMT, OT and IT device in healthcare environments, with capabilities ranging from micro-segmentation and improved device insight to identify exposed EPHI and stopping ransomware. Cynerio protects hospitals from a variety of modern cyber attacks. To learn more about Cynerio at cynerio.com or follow them on X at Cynerio and of course LinkedIn. Now, just a quick reminder about saving the date for our fall MD Expo. We're headed to the Mohegan Sun Casino and Resort in Connecticut from October the 8th to the 10th. So please join us for 3 days of education, networking, and the latest advances in medical technology products and services. For more details and registration details, please visit mdexposhow.com. I'd also like to point out that please mark your calendars for the HTM Mixer. Now, this is being held at the Marriott Resort Griffin Gate in Lexington, Kentucky from November the 15th and 16th. Now, our mixers are a slightly modified, smaller and shorter duration, less crowded event, but still provides valuable continuing education, networking and vendor engagement opportunities. So for more information and registration details, please visit htmmixer.com. I'd also like to add that it's in its continued effort to promote and applaud the men and women in the HTM industry, TechNation magazine is holding its second annual Tech Choice Awards, also known as the Wrenches. Now, nominations are being accepted in a variety of categories, including Military BMT of the Year, Women in Leadership, and Outstanding Vendor of the Year until August the 16th. Up to 13 wrenches will be awarded, with the winner selected based on 100% on votes from those who make up the HTM industry. Voting begins on October the 1st through January the 10th, 2025, and the winners will be announced in the March 2025 issue of TechNation. More details can be found in the handout section of the dashboard and online at onetechnation.com/Tech Choice Awards. Today's webinar, of course, is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI, and you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving away one of our Webinar Wednesday 10th anniversary prizes. Today's prize is a pair of Apple AirPods. So using the questions feature on your dashboard, just let me know the answer to the following trivia question. July is National Ice Cream Month, and today is Peach Ice Cream Day. So which state is known as the Peach State? I'll reveal the answer and of course our winner at the end of the webinar. We'll be wrapping up today's presentation with a live Q&A, so please submit your questions anytime using the questions feature on the webinar dashboard. As I mentioned earlier, our presenter today is Chad Holmes, and he will be discussing combating ransomware in healthcare with network detection and response. So Chad, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Awesome, thank you, Linda. You have a much deserved rest after those ad reads, because those took about 10 minutes by my watch, so good job. First of all, thank you for having me as always. I'm super excited that MD Expo is going to be in Connecticut this year. It means I can actually attend without having to jump on a plane, which is always nice. And I do hope that you provide some kind of gold or silver plated wrenches for those actual Wrenchy Award winners. That out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking a little bit about how we can combat ransomware in healthcare. As Linda said, there we go. My name is Chad Holmes. I'm a security evangelist at Cynerio. As a little bit of background, over the course of my career, I started as a software developer, so I was making things, I was writing code. That shifted into security work, where I started breaking things for good. I broke them so that we could then secure them. And now what I do in my role is I teach others to do both. And with that in mind, what I'm going to do today is hopefully help explain to you, one, the challenges we're seeing in terms of cybersecurity in healthcare. So we'll spend roughly the first half of today's presentation talking about those challenges, why they exist, why we have a lot of technical debt, things like that. And then the second half, we're going to shift into some new innovations, some new guidance, and one particularly new set of technologies called network detection and response, or detection and response technologies. Now, we also do have a heat wave hitting most of the United States, so anyone in the US knows that. I decided I'd go and get a nice cold picture from December. So I hope that my hiking picture there on top of Mount Lafayette helps cool you all off. So what we're going to talk about today is, first, we will hit on the state of healthcare cybersecurity and the role that HTM or biomed team members play in cybersecurity, simply because I don't think if we don't understand the core issues we're facing and how you all relate to them, then we can't really jump into solutions for those issues. So we'll hit on the core of those issues. We'll talk a little bit about attacker motives and the critical moments in the attacks that they're presenting. Then we'll hit in some evolving guidance and regulations, and then we'll get to the really big part of the new technologies coming out, the network detection and response technologies. Now, as I go through, I strongly encourage everyone to ask questions. I will do my absolute best to get to them in real time, but if I don't worry, I'll hit them later on in the presentation. And if for some reason I miss them there, you can always reach out to me after, and I will address the questions offline as well. So ask all the questions you want, and I'll do my best to answer those. So let's look a little bit into what the state of healthcare cybersecurity is. And as most of you know, it's not good. I want to show you exactly how not good it is, though. So first of all, every 7.1 minutes right now, we see a cyber attack on US hospitals. That means during today's presentation, we'll see between 8 and 9 attacks. Now, I want to be clear, not all those attacks are successful. Not all lead to massive system outages. In fact, a lot of them are detected and stopped rather quickly. But the reality is it only takes that one needle in the haystack for one to sneak through to really, really impact the care and availability of hospitals. So because we're seeing so many attacks, we are seeing downtime because of them. And we are the most attacked industry in the critical infrastructure category within the US. So when you look at us and you look at power grids and oil pipelines and all that stuff, 24% attacks on critical infrastructure are focused on healthcare. And the reason is pretty simple. We provide the greatest path to revenue for hackers. And I'll dive into some of that as we go. And unfortunately, what that has led to is that over the last 15 or 20 years, nearly half of all hospitals have reported suffering a ransomware attack in some way. Many of them are small, some are really, really big, and I'll give you some examples there. But the reason that we're seeing more and more of these attacks is because not only are we incredibly vulnerable because we've adopted advanced technology, but not advanced protections, but also we see some amount of the time, roughly up to half, people will actually pay the ransoms. And we all know, if you've ever watched a thriller movie, that you should never ever pay the ransom because it just encourages more attacks. And unfortunately, that's the situation we're in. Now, the outcome of these attacks just are not encrypting systems. They're not just big ransom payments, but they are also leaking patient data. Last year alone, about 1 in 3 people in the US had their patient records exposed in some way. That's about 127 million records. Nearly all of those, about 118 million of those, were due to hacking or IT instances. So where patient exposure used to be, someone would go in and grab paper off a copying machine, as an example. Now the vast majority of those exposures are through digital means. And then finally, these are all interesting numbers, they're all bad, but the reality is that when a cyber attack happens, there are very, very real impacts on patients. And the reason for this is not because hackers are trying to harm patients. What hackers are trying to do is take systems offline in hopes of making money through ransom payments, selling data, etc. And so when we think about things like 1/3 of the time there's increased mortality rates during attacks, we need to think of them not as targeted attacks on individuals, but think of them in terms of system outages. Think of them like we would a power outage, a blizzard, a hurricane, an earthquake, what have you. Whenever you take systems offline, regardless of the reason, we know for a well-defined fact that we're going to see an impact on patient care. And that's what's driving these mortality rates. It's not because hackers are targeting us as individuals, it's because they're targeting hospital systems and making it so they can't provide care, and that naturally hurts patients in the long run. And we have to really start thinking about what this means to our environments, because it's not just Change Healthcare. For those that may not be familiar, Change processes payments for a large number of the healthcare systems in the United States. They got hacked several months ago. They paid a $22 million ransom, and believe it or not, when they paid the bad guys, it didn't actually fix the problems. They hoped it would. It may have accelerated some of the recovery, but it wasn't a magic bullet to get out of the attack. Interesting fact about that as well is there were two actual hacker gangs that participated in the attack. When that $22 million ransom was paid, it went to one hacker gang that did not share it with the other. And the reason we knew about the attack so quickly is because the gang that had got burnt, that had not been paid, published some details that allowed us to know about this. So at the end of the day, there is no honor amongst thieves. Even when gangs are working together, one is eventually going to burn the other one, and that's what we saw here. Back to the attack, though, not only did Change pay the ransom, but the estimated cost at the time was up to $100 million in real cost per day per provider that was impacted. And at the end of the day, the real cost just to Change Healthcare alone, never mind the cascading costs, was $872 million in one quarter. So it's pretty safe to say that they could have implemented better security controls for a fraction of that cost. But at the end of the day, that's where they are. We'll continue to see more details coming out. Now, I mentioned earlier that in 2023, we had about 127 million records exposed and 118 were due to hacking and IT incidences. Change Healthcare alone surpassed that 118 number with this one breach. So whereas 2023 was a high mark for all of the United States, one attack in 2024 far surpassed that, and we'll see those numbers just shoot through the roof for the rest of the year. Now, the reason that this slide is titled Not Just Change is because Change is not the only hospital system, payment processor, or something else related to healthcare that has had a major impact on patient care. This is just a small sampling of the hospitals that have been attacked over the last 3 years or so. In total, there's closer to 1,500 or so that have seen exposed patient data. These are just the ones that have been forward enough to share their experiences and share what it costs them to recover. So you have University of Vermont, where someone actually took their laptop on vacation, which many of us do, opened email, clicked the wrong link, got hit by a phishing attack, ended up shutting down the network for 4 months and costing them over $60 million to recover. We have Scripps in Southern California that costs over $120 million to recover. They had cybersecurity insurance, but it only paid $6 million of the cost, to give you some idea about what cybersecurity insurance does and doesn't do. We also look overseas at places like Health Service Executive in Ireland, where they had an outage for 5 months. It encrypted 80% of their IT systems and cost them over $500 million with a B dollars to restore. And all these are really awful until you look at St. Margaret's Health in rural Illinois, where because of a ransomware attack combined with some other challenges locally, they actually had to shut their doors because while they were able to provide care during the attack, they weren't able to bill and collect the money they needed to continue operations and therefore shut down, ultimately because of the attack. And it can be easy to think that these are really complex, really hard attacks to pull off, but the reality is healthcare is getting hit so hard because the attacks are actually quite easy. And I have to give credit to Eric Decker, who is the CISO at Intermountain Health for this bottom left graphic. But effectively, when we look at the attacks on healthcare, they break down into 3 primary categories. One is social engineering, right? Just figuring out some way to get access through us as individuals. One is third-party compromise. Hospitals are highly interconnected, and if you breach one of their partners, one of their providers, there's a chance you can attack them as well. And the third is system vulnerability compromise, right? You have IV pumps, which I love to pick on because they're all over the place and they're so vulnerable. They are known to have critical vulnerabilities about half the time. When attackers know this, they can easily focus on them and use them to replicate attacks. And I read an interview actually from yesterday in the newspaper, and someone was saying these are really sophisticated, really hard attacks. And unfortunately, I have to disagree. Healthcare environments are underprotected to the point where hackers with some very basic tools and very basic knowledge can go in and really powerfully do damage to healthcare environments. So the reality is we're an easy path to money for these attackers. We have a lot of vulnerabilities and they take full advantage of them. And if anyone does want references, I have them there at the bottom right. I'll be happy to pass them along offline. And so naturally, this gets to a point where HCM team members, biomed say, yeah, this is great, but what does it actually have to do with me? I am here to turn the wrenches and make sure these devices operate. And the reality is that we actually are starting to see that HCM priorities and security team priorities are starting to overlap quite a bit. And this is why you all are being so tasked, or being tasked so much more frequently to actually help with security stuff, right? So if we look at the priorities for HTM, it typically comes down to making sure devices operate as expected, making sure they're safe, making sure they're secure, making sure they get repaired when need be. Ideally, you're doing it in as efficient a manner as possible, so you're minimizing the cost and the overhead to the hospital. That allows for patients to be treated more quickly and more effectively. Increasingly, you're getting tasked with security controls, and occasionally, the powers that be will come to you and say, "Hey, you're the ones actually doing the work here. Can you give us some guidance on what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it in certain ways? Because we think that will help inform us on how to plan getting more equipment, maintaining more equipment, etc." So at the end of the day, you're tasked with all these activities, but what people are starting to see is these activities overlap very, very strongly with security tools and data that comes from these tools that helps you to actually do your job better. So we measure your priorities against the security overlap. We start to see that by doing automated analysis, not only can we find security vulnerabilities in devices, but we can also start to tell you things about like where the devices are, what their patch level is, where what the MDS2 says should be default settings, giving you patch instructions, giving you real-time inventory, saying, hey, if you need to fix 1,000 IV pumps or maintain 1,000 IV pumps, here's where 900 of those are, and here are the 100 that are missing. This data that we're collecting from network analysis is allowing us to not only see the security side of things, but also helping make HTM team members that much more efficient. And again, when the kind of powers that be in hospitals step back and say, oh my goodness, we have this whole workforce with their feet on the ground and they have access to this data, it naturally becomes understandable, at least, why they are tasking you with more and more security procedures. So as we go through, I'm hoping this one helps open people's eyes to why you're being tasked with security, and two, gets a lot of you more interested in security and what your career may advance to in the future. Sometimes it's just being knowledgeable. Sometimes it is a whole security swing. So if anyone does have questions about that, I'm happy to answer it. At the end of the day, though, we understand, we have to acknowledge that HTM is increasingly responsible for providing insight, for implementing security controls, and providing understanding to those around them about what's happening from a security standpoint. I would love to see if there are any questions about that. And so when we look at how these solutions are being adopted, not just at the HTM level, but across the whole hospital, we have to step back and realize there's the technology of yesterday, or I should say the technology of today that's being bypassed by hackers. And then there's the forward-looking technology that's really learning from these attacks that are happening and why they're happening. So if you think about the typical healthcare environment today, you typically have a CIO or a CISO running everything. They're in charge of security. Those people are typically overburdened, understaffed, underfunded, all the unders and overs that we all know about. They work with IT and security analyst teams. They work through a bunch of dashboards. They have every possible screen you can imagine telling them all the data that's going through the hospital. And then they just have this massive, massive mess of technology that they've come to acquire and rely on over the past 20 years, right? Anything from anti-phishing to VPNs to firewalls and everything in between. And I think the frustrating part for a lot of hospitals is this all costs a lot of money, just millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, if not more than that. And they're stepping back and saying, why do we have to add more? And what people often forget is that all of this is necessary. You have to have all these protections and structure in place because you have created environments that are highly connected, that are exchanging patient data, that are introducing cyber physical threats, meaning someone can attack a website and control a hospital robot, for example, taking those bits and bytes and making them incredibly real in terms of human interaction. And so as we've expanded adoption of all those technologies, we have not kept up with the security controls around them, which has led to this really dense environment of technology that is not keeping up with the protections we need. And so if we take a step back and look at the more advanced organizations and hospitals that have invested more heavily in cyber protections, we'll start to see that they still have a CISO or a CIO at the core of everything. That CISO or CIO is probably getting more money than in traditional environments in terms of a ratio of the overall expenditure. but they also have access to MSSPs, kind of third-party consultancies to overly simplify it, that can help guide them through security. And they're also working more and more with HTM teams to implement a lot of these security controls. They then extend integration, so all these systems start to work together more freely. On the left, you can see that's a mess. The better those are integrated, the better. And they also start to look at devices beyond IT. A lot of security up to this point has focused on securing Windows machines pretty much. But as we look at the growing number of connected devices, which can reach up to 50% in some environments, forward-looking hospitals, industry leaders are realizing that they have to do a better job protecting their IoT and IoMT devices as well. In one place that they're really starting to focus their investment and attention on are what I like to call the DR technology. This is the detection and response technologies. And effectively, these focus on monitoring network traffic, which is NDR, monitoring the endpoints, which is EDR, combining all that data together, which is XDR, and then managing it with people, which is MDR. And I'll go into this in more detail. But just think of this slide as what we're doing on the left right today in most hospitals. And then on the right, this is what we need to start doing in the future. And to understand why we have to do all this, we have to understand attacker motives. And I've already said this a few times, this is one of the easiest slides to present. It's money. End of story, no question about it. Attackers are here for money. Occasionally I'll get asked, well, aren't they attacking individuals? And the reality is there's maybe 25 people in the entire world that are worth attacking at an individual level, right? They're usually heads of state, and they're usually not on systems that are connected to networks that are hackable or even connected at all. So the reality is that attackers are completely driven by money at this point, meaning they'll take out entire systems before they take out individuals because those systems are more likely to pay money. And when we talk about why, we have to understand that record values for healthcare are incredibly high compared to the other records that are readily available. So Social Security numbers in the US, you can actually buy online for about $1 per record. If you look at credit cards, you can buy them for about $5. And the reason being is you can put protections on Social Security numbers, you can cancel credit cards. But our healthcare data is often immutable. It's often hard to rewrite, to delete, to get rid of. And that data is incredibly useful for fraud in a lot of cases. So when we look at electronic patient data, that typically runs for $50 to $250 per record online. And so that's the first place that attackers look at, is if they can steal a bunch of data, they can sell it to someone else who's committing fraud, and they can make a lot of money there. But also, we know that hackers are really, really smart. They're evil, but they're smart, right? So what they do is they find other ways to kind of secure their payment. Because if they steal data and they don't get paid, they've got to find some other way to make money. And that's where ransomware attacks come in. So if we look at 2023, where I said we hit a high on number of patient records exposed, we also hit a high on the amount that was paid. We paid about $100 million in ransom payments in the US in 2023, just in healthcare alone. In 2024, again, we know that change was 22 million. So it's almost impossible for that 100 million not to be going up this year. And unfortunately, about half the time, 47% of the time in some studies, healthcare entities will pay the ransom. I'm not saying they should or should not. The FBI absolutely says they should not. But in some cases, you can be tricked into thinking that paying the ransom will get your systems back online more quickly, and therefore will allow you to provide care to your community more quickly. It's not a decision anyone ever wants to have to make, and there is no right answer there. But at the end of the day, we've seen a lot of ransoms paid, which therefore drive the ransom payments. And then finally, we've seen that this has turned into triple extortion. Effectively, what the hackers do is they go in, they steal your data. Then they encrypt the systems, and then they go through that data before they release it to the wild, and they take out people who may be publicly sensitive. Politicians, actors, billionaires, folks like that, whose records may not want to get out there, and then they will individually extort them. And so effectively what's happened is attackers have found 3 direct paths to revenue once they're in an environment that is going to guarantee them some kind of payment, whether it's from the billionaire or by selling massive amounts of data or getting a ransom payment. So when it comes down to asking, why are we being hacked? It almost always comes down to money and almost nothing else. So just remember that if anyone asks you that. And the really, really frustrating part, at least from our side as a technology company, is that there are critical moments in these attacks that if we were looking for them, if we knew to focus on them, we would actually be able to stop these attacks before they start. And these are things like stress test treadmills that have been infected and are trying to infect the rest of a network. If we were just looking at a stress test treadmill, we could actually find that and take it offline. Microbial detection units in a lab, we found one that was connecting to Cynerio, which it should never be doing from the US. If you're looking for that connection, you could easily take this offline. In this case, hit it with a hammer and throw it in the trash bin. It was end of life. It was easy to fix. But looking at things like this is if you see it really quickly, and you can also often resolve an issue within minutes, if not an hour or two, meaning the infection doesn't spread, the data isn't stolen, and it doesn't lead to a system outage. Unfortunately, the traditional technologies we rely on do not look at these more modern attack vectors, and therefore are leaving all these devices susceptible to attack. And so to help prevent this, we've seen a lot of evolving guidance and regulation coming out. And the reason we're seeing that is because, unfortunately, as an industry, we have not done a good job in self-regulating. If you look at the purchasing card industry, they realized about 20 years ago that there was a lot of online fraud happening, and they realized they had to do something to start regulating themselves, or the government would step in. And they came up with PCI DSS, and it's been rather effective. Unfortunately, in healthcare, we haven't done that. And if we look at the quick timeline of regulations over the last 10 years, it becomes very clear where a lot of focus is. In 2015, we had one Cybersecurity Act, and that was across multiple industries, not just healthcare. It took another 4 years before anything healthcare specific came out of that. That was the first version of 405D, or HICCUP as some people call it. It took another 4 years, but then in 2023, last year, we started to see a burst of activity based specifically on healthcare because so many attacks have been happening in the last 18 months. We saw an update to 405D, we saw the Patch Act launch, we saw the National Cybersecurity Strategy mention healthcare specifically. We saw a bipartisan group of senators that agree on almost nothing, agreed on the Rural Hospital Cybersecurity Enhancement Act that they're working on. And then we finally saw a federal investment in the form of DigiHeals, looking to fund projects which would help advance cybersecurity protections in healthcare. And 2023 was a great year for identifying areas of improvement and helping provide regulation and guidance around them. 2024 has been even more productive. We saw the release of this HPH cybersecurity performance goals last year. We saw that the presidential budget included $1.3 billion proposed for small and rural hospitals. We saw the upgrade efforts from ARPA-H, which also did DigiHeals, are introducing more funding for securing healthcare environments. And just yesterday, we saw, again, a bipartisan group of senators, one Republican, one Democrat, and one independent, are proposing the Healthcare Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2024. So at the end of the day, this is not meant to be a political slide. The reality is we have a set of environments that are under attack. We are not self-regulating. And when that happens, the government will come in, will step in with guidance, if not new laws, and hopefully new funding to help us all out. And that's the exact path that we're on. And one piece of guidance I really want to highlight is the cybersecurity performance goals that I mentioned in that last slide. Effectively, what these do is they give us two very, very simple checklists to understand. The essential goals, the things that we should be doing today, things as simple as basic email security, multi-factor authentication, making sure that if someone leaves the hospital, that their access is revoked. All incredibly basic things that are done across all other industries. We need to make sure those are implemented today, and then we need to start focusing on enhancing our capabilities with the enhanced goals. And that's where NDR, I promise I would get to NDR eventually, that's where NDR becomes very important, because one of the main drivers of these enhanced goals is better detection and response to relevant threats. Effectively, if there's an attack on a hospital, let's not wait until it fully encrypts a bunch of systems to try to detect and recover from it. Instead, let's detect it as quickly as possible and minimize the damage it can do to our environments. And that's where we'll start getting into actual NDR. I'm going to take a break, just 1 second, because I've been talking a lot. So what NDR is, at a high level, it stands for Network Detection and Response. Effectively, it monitors network traffic to see malicious traffic behavior, communication patterns, communication with Cynerio, for example, that other in-place technologies may not. And when it detects those, not only does it say, hey, you have something wrong, but it will often remove the false positives, particularly in solutions tailored to healthcare, where the types of environments and types of communication patterns are well known. So it will not only detect them, but it will provide you instructions on how to respond to those. Whether it is segmenting or quarantining your device, taking it offline, doing a hard reset, there's a bunch of different ways we can do it. But NDR technologies are there to detect these and provide you clear instructions and hopefully support in doing so. The market for NDR products has been around for about 2.5, 3 years now. There are over 30 vendors in the market. Gartner's done a mini report, which is really helpful, and they all have a similar goal. The implementation is different, but the goal is similar: detect those attacks and stop them as soon as possible. Now, where they get a little bit different is how the protections are deployed, analyzed, the resource consumption, etc. So we always encourage people to look at this broader category and figure out the best solution for yourself. But those products that have a more healthcare focus are naturally going to help healthcare environments a little bit more. When we look at the traditional tech stack, that kind of big, ugly slide that I put up earlier, it's easy to question, well, why doesn't intrusion detection, for example, identify these attacks that healthcare doesn't? And the NDR does. Excuse me. The reality is that old IDS, IDP, and IDPS systems, they look for very, very basic communication patterns. They often don't have context of the traffic flowing back and forth. So because those are signature-centric, because they can be incredibly noisy and produce huge rates of false positives, maybe one real finding per 10,000 false positive, these are just not realistic for healthcare environments. You're already too stressed. You don't have enough time, people, money, resources. There's no way we can take old technology that is subpar at detecting new attacks and give you high false positive rates. And at the end of the day, the really blunt way to put it is the old technologies are not doing what they need to keep up with new attacks. If they were, I wouldn't have hundreds and hundreds of examples of attacks that I could give you. So the goal for us in healthcare is to create NDR technologies that extend these protections. We're not trying to replace them. They're doing a good job at what they were built for, but we need to make sure we're taking what they have as a core and extending them to modern protections. And so when we look at the emerging detection and response suite, again, these are reactive safety nets of protections. They are typically very low touch, meaning you install them, they alert you when there's an emergency, and then you work through the response from there. It may be that if you have an NDR product or some other DR product, you only work with it once or twice a year because those are the 1 or 2 times that you see a successful attack. But you'll work with it quickly, you'll identify the attack, and you'll handle it as you work on bigger products. And with NDR specifically, there's a big word jumble of NDR, EDR, et cetera. The NDR goal is to complement endpoint detection, inform XDR, and enable MDR. And to help visualize that a little bit more, I've made this fun little chart. But effectively, what NDR does there on the left is identifies when data is being exfiltrated, stolen, detect when there's a ransomware attack, and feed that into an XDR system. So it's monitoring network traffic. It's saying, here's something wrong. Hey, XDR system, you might want to know this about this. EDR, on the other hand, will be deployed on some of the endpoints, Windows machines in particular, and also be saying, hey, this Windows machine is acting kind of weird. And that gives a really rich data set for analysts to further analyze from. Now, all these products can operate standalone, but long-term, this is the structure we want to put in place. And all of them have their own strengths and weaknesses, right? NDR is really good at network traffic, but it's not necessarily monitoring individual devices because it's not installed in the devices. Whereas EDR is really good at specific devices, but it can't be installed on a lot of medical devices because it could just put them at risk, and you can't put those devices at risk if they are providing care. So EDR and NDR are incredibly well complemented and feed into advanced analysis engines. Excuse me. At the bottom there, we also see MDR, which is Managed Detection and Response. Think of this as the expert security outsiders that are going to help your team take security to the next level. They have these toolkits in place, they have the expertise needed, they can provide you the skill sets and the people that you may not be able to find locally, and they help you accelerate your programs. So we have a dedicated focus on NDR. We have partners that do XDR, and EDR, and MDR. So I'm happy to walk through the differences to anyone that has additional questions. But for today, I hope that helps at least explain what the technologies do for good and bad. And the problem with NDR in healthcare is that it works really, really well regardless of the environment, but tuning NDR engines can be really challenging. To put it another way, the engine that is sitting at Goldman Sachs or Amazon or Microsoft to detect attacks probably does not work as well in healthcare environments as healthcare focused engines do. Just like healthcare focused NDR engines probably shouldn't be deployed to Goldman or Amazon or Microsoft because they face very different attacks and have much more complex environments. So within the healthcare environment, we're starting to see that there's a couple different challenges that have had to be addressed by NDR products. One is that because the industry is under-resourced, that you have less protections and less money than other industries, and you're facing more widespread attacks in other industries, we have to figure out, or we have had to figure out, I should say, how to create a product that is technically very strong, but presents things in a very simple, straightforward manner that can be consumed by overworked, overstressed teams rather easily. So that's one issue that we've seen at the industry level. We've also seen that in healthcare environments, there are unique footprints that are pretty similar across the environments, but do not align with other industries by any means. So a lot of times you can't take the learnings from those other environments and directly correlate them to healthcare. We also are seeing that we have to think beyond IT when it comes to healthcare environments because of the myriad of devices that are launched that cannot be monitored, again, like IV pumps, like CT machines, that aren't really well monitored by traditional NDR products from other industries. And then finally, and this is what the nerdy side of me thinks is most interesting, is when you look at the number of protocols communicating data throughout different environments, there are about 230 to 240 different protocols across all industries. There are roughly 160 protocols that are unique to healthcare environments. So without knowledge of those protocols and without being able to go into those individual packets and do further analysis, many NDR offerings will actually miss very obvious attacks compared to healthcare specific offerings that are able to better understand those additional 160 or so protocols that are missed at a high level. And what this allows us to do is actually extend protections to not just malicious activity, but see where EPHI may be exfiltrated, where ransomware attacks are spreading, et cetera. So the long and short of it is that NDR is still an emerging technology. It's a technology that is being proven across other industries. And by just a little bit of tailoring and a little bit of insight to the unique nature of healthcare environments, we can find ways to tailor these products like ours to healthcare and help better protect against attacks. And so if you remember the slide from earlier, this is where those critical moments are so important. I mentioned the stress test treadmill and microbial detection unit, but as we're seeing is more and more of these attacks start with one individual device, one computer, one laptop, and then they spread from there. So if we're able to monitor network traffic, particularly for those devices that don't have endpoint protections put on them, we can see that these attacks try to spread in very verbose, very inelegant ways. They effectively just put a bunch of malicious packets on the network and hope that they find a landing spot and spread from there. And so if we're looking from these critical moments that I mentioned earlier, that treadmill will not be able to spread because we're able to detect it and get it offline quickly. Now, interestingly enough, the rightmost topic here is one that we're seeing more and more. The first time we saw this was about 2 years ago, where a vendor bypassed security controls and got on a network and had a crypto miner that was really eating up network consumption. We've seen this several times recently with new customers. As we go in and we deploy our technology, we see 1 or 2 machines that are just lighting up the network and causing lag. And it may not be an attack, but it is certainly an efficiency and cost thing. And it's because employees, sometimes disgruntled, sometimes just bored in one case, will put crypto miners on the device, on local devices, and those crypto miners will sit there and just consume resources hoping to find Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency. So the reality is not only are we finding and stopping attacks, but we're finding where there's misallocation of resources that are costing the hospital time and money that could be better used. And we're really, really happy to be able to help our customers with that as well. And so as we move on here, if you do want to learn more about this, I've given kind of a high to mid-level overview. We have written a buyer's guide about what NDR is. It goes into more depth than this presentation, but it will give you the basics of NDR, some of the stuff we've covered here. It will talk about those complementary technologies. I know that the DR words can get kind of jumbled up. So it'll make sure it gives you a much better breakdown of NDR, EDR, XDR, et cetera. And it will dive a little bit deeper into the core capabilities of NDR products. It will also dive into the functional details, right? It'll talk about traffic modeling. So there's this concept that if you understand what the flow of traffic should and should not be, you can actually remove a lot of the analysis and make things even more efficient. And to give you a great example, if you have an IV pump in a room and it's communicating with a nurse's station and it's doing so at a certain frequency, that makes perfect sense. You don't always have to analyze all of that data. But if that IV pump is instead communicating with an elevator, which is communicating with a hospital robot and then a Tesla, that looks much more dangerous. So by being able to do traffic modeling, we're able to actually do better, more efficient analysis and do a better job reporting on findings. It also talks about breach detection and how we contain breaches, because the reality is it's very, very hard to protect against all attacks and all breaches. But if you take a little bit more of a bend and don't break attitude, right? Maybe something sneaks through and we stop it as soon as possible. That gives us a really nice safety net that we can work from as we work to extend our protections to micro-segmentation and other efforts. And the buyer's guide also talks about AI and ML. As you might imagine, everyone is a Gen AI company right now. But one of the really, really cool things for AI within technologies like NDR is because we have the vast amount of data that we have to analyze, and it's just impossible for any humans to do that, no matter how many you have, doing first and second passes of analysis in automated ways, and then escalating potential true positives to analyst teams for that additional human touch can be a very, very effective method for weeding out a lot of the noise and really, really focusing on the truly malicious traffic. So if you do want to do that, if you do want access to that, feel free to hit that QR code. It should bring you right to the download page and give you additional detail. And again, we do have a NDR product, as I've mentioned a few times. We call it Cynerio NDR-H, NDR for healthcare. This is an entirely healthcare-focused product. So as I was mentioning earlier, if we focus only on healthcare, we have better analysis of protocols, better understanding of the traffic, and can present that data in a very, very efficient way. One of the simple features we have, which is simple but powerful, is we have a dashboard that will show you, here are the attacks you have to care about. If you flick the little button, it will then show you all the traffic we saw. So you can do additional traffic analysis if you want. Little things like that we're finding in healthcare environments technically are not complicated, but in terms of usability, they're incredibly valuable. So if you do want to learn more about this, feel free to reach out and I will be happy to answer any of your questions and schedule a demo with our team to dive deeper into the technology. So we'll get those questions in. I'll answer questions in just 1 or 2 slides, but I do want to give you some key takeaways that you can act on coming out of today's session. First is, remember that HTM teams are increasingly responsible for cybersecurity. It may not be what you signed up for. It may be a little intimidating in some cases, but at the end of the day, you have the feet on the ground, you're interacting with devices, and increasingly we see people tasking HTM with cybersecurity responsibilities. That is, 1, very powerful, but 2, if you're interested in security, can be a very, very good way to expand your career and your horizons. Next, our current efforts for cybersecurity are necessary but not sufficient. We need to take what we have in place, acknowledge that we've done a good job putting them in place, but they need to be extended and start adopting new technologies. Third, we are number 1, but not in a good way. We are the most attacked critical infrastructure industry. We will continue to be so. This is not magically going to go away. We provide hackers a path to money, and they're going to continue to take advantage of that until we do something about it. Next, the guidelines we're getting are improving and they are effective. Those cybersecurity performance goals I briefly went over are incredibly powerful in providing guidance on where you should be focusing your efforts now and in the future. So when someone says, I'm not sure what to do, I've got 2 lists of 10 simple steps you can take, and I'll be happy to pass those along after. Next is the DR technologies are complementary and they're effective, but it does take some time to implement some, and others are rather quick. So start to figure out what your challenges are. I'm happy to sit down and talk to anyone that has questions and figure out the best way to take advantage of these new technologies. NDR is the one that we specifically focus on, which helps you to detect attacks, respond to them, and often stop them within a matter of minutes. You have to have healthcare expertise in healthcare environments. Otherwise, you're going to miss these attacks. And finally, if you do have questions, you can always go to our website at cynerio.com. So with that, Linda, I know we have some questions coming in. I'm going to take a drink while you read those, but I'll hand it off to you for any questions that have come in.
Yeah, we've got quite a few, Chad, actually. So the first one is, how much additional effort does NDR analyst put on our current team?
Yeah, so that's one of the really nice things about NDR is there's a little bit of effort up front for installation from your IT team. Usually you put what we call a collector or a physical appliance on site. There's about an afternoon's worth of configuration, and then we will only notify you when there is a known validated attack, right? We do all the false positive reduction from you. To contrast that, things like EDR, endpoint detection and response, also has its own merits, but you have to put a client on every single device that's willing to accept it. That takes a lot of time, and those clients cannot be put on every device because they're providing care. So relative to some of the other security controls in place, NDR is incredibly lightweight because it looks at network traffic, not individual device behavior.
Okay, and another NDR question here is actually, are NDR active scanners? And if so, how do you protect medical devices against unintentional scanning?
Yeah, okay, so that's a really good question. I'll try not to talk all day about this one. So effectively what you can do in a lot of other environments where if you have a system outage, it's kind of a minor irritation, is you can do active scanning on those networks. Effectively, you take something like a really good tool is Qualys, for example. You take it and you just start finding all the endpoints and then sending somewhat malicious packets to those endpoints to see if they respond in a way that show that they're vulnerable. I've oversimplified it, but effectively you scan for known vulnerabilities. In healthcare, you can't do that because if you scan an IV pump or a CT machine or whatever other piece of machinery that's out there providing care, and you take that device offline, you're likely going to impact someone's care and potentially lead to really bad situations. So NDR technologies are not active scanners. Instead, they do the exact opposite. They do passive scanning. So they take all the network traffic that's coming through, all that traffic stays on site, and it does a analysis of real-time copies of that traffic. So it's not interfering with flow, it's not slowing the traffic down. It's just saying, okay, here's a packet, it's coming from point A to point B. Are those valid points? And does the packet contain something that might be malicious? So no, we're not doing active scanning, we're doing passive scanning, which protects the patients, it protects the devices, and it provides a different level of insight that is incredibly powerful.
Perfect, great. Just a general question here is, I'm a biomed with a degree in network security and IT network experience, and have been trying to get the hospitals that I've worked for to get HTM involved in IT medical equipment security, but they seem to not want me involved. How do we get these hospitals to finally start looking at the importance of the HTM department in this issue?
If I knew that answer, I would tell you it. The reality is that healthcare environments are a mixed bag of security experience, right? Some CISOs are incredibly good, or CIOs are incredibly good at being ahead of the game, and they're constantly fighting for more budget, more people. They understand where we need to go. A lot of hospitals, particularly small and rural ones or underfunded ones, don't even have a CIO, or I'm sorry, don't have a CISO in some cases. So they don't have anyone that's explicitly responsible for security. It kind of rolls up under CIOs. So in terms of tactics, it really comes down to an individual level. I would highly encourage any leadership out there to go to any conference you possibly can, HIMSS, AHIS, any of the ones, HISAC, any of the ones that are out there, because a very, very large number of those sessions are on cybersecurity and what people need to do to better secure their environments. But the reality is we have 7,000 hospitals in the US. We do not have 7,000 CISOs for those hospitals. And so it's a really, really big struggle. The best guidance I can give you is provide them the cybersecurity performance goals, encourage them to come to webinars like this and those of my colleagues, and just try to educate with the constant drumbeat. There is no magic wand. The closest we'll come to a magic wand is if federal regulations are put in place that require it, and that will lead to an entire other set of battles when that eventually happens. So at this point, it's education and hoping and doing everything you can to make a difference. So wish I had a better answer for you, but that's where we are as an industry.
That's great. And just following on that, another attendee is perhaps in the future we shall hire a cybersecurity director.
Yeah, so one thing I always like to recommend people do is they look at how other leading industries are modeling out their security programs. And a great example is I started my career in application security, where we looked at source code and found vulnerabilities there. That was 20 years ago, and at the time, everyone fought against that because why would you ever do that? Now, every major organization has an application security director and team looking at source code. For healthcare, we won't get to that point just because of the nature of healthcare, and we don't necessarily develop our own stuff a lot of the time. But we should absolutely have medical device security directors for focus. We should also have better teamwork between teams, much like the last person asked, talked about, so we can have HTM and IT and clinical engineers and everyone else all working under one umbrella, kind of pedaling in the right direction.
Perfect. So can you estimate how common is it for healthcare cyber attacks to start with a medical device?
Yeah, so the vast majority of attacks actually start with phishing. They find one entryway in, and then what they do is they use the medical devices to propagate across an environment. The simple way to respond to that would be, well, if we stop phishing, then we won't have to worry about medical device security. And if anyone can magically stop phishing, I would love to see it, and you'll become a billionaire. We've been trying for 20 years. It's not going to happen. We have to have defense in depth. So the reality is a lot of these attacks do not start with the devices, but they use those devices to infect the entire network and really get to every corner to implement the most damage. So it's not always about stopping it at the start, but detecting it as soon as possible, understanding how it spreads, and stopping it wherever possible.
Perfect. Another question here is, I have antivirus and firewall installed on the hospital network. Is there any other technology applicable to avoid ransomware?
Oh yeah, let me go back in a slide here. So a couple things. First of all, I'm sorry, there we go. This slide shows you a long list of the standard technologies that are there. So antivirus absolutely needed, firewalls absolutely needed. But the reality is you need to go much deeper and implement as many of these as possible. And if this is overwhelming, and feel free to take a screenshot if you want, if this is overwhelming, I point everyone to, bear with me, I'll get there, there we go. Again, the cybersecurity performance goals, you can see the link at the bottom, or just Google HPH cybersecurity performance goals. This breaks it down into the 10 essential goals you have and the 10 enhanced goals. So you should be able to check off all 10 essential goals today. If not, that's what you want to focus on. And then you should start investigating the 10 enhanced goals on the right-hand side there.
Perfect. Now, I hope I'm going to say this correctly. How do you install an application for, say, Quails agent? It's Quails. Yeah, on a medical device that isn't running Windows, like pumps, etc.
Yeah, so typically you can't install agents on medical devices at all. So it's not the technical capability. Most of those devices, for those that don't know, have bespoke or customized operating systems. So even the ones with Windows often have a modified Windows operating system. Most are running on some version of Linux or some other operating system that's customized for that device. So one is the agents often do not exist for those devices. And if they do, there are certain categories of devices that it is very ill-conceived to put endpoint protections on, because you will impact the care of patients if something goes sideways there. So the question is not always, hey, how can I put a Qualys agent on there, or whatever product you're using? It's, can we even do that technically? Usually not. Should we be doing that? Usually not. And what alternative methods can we take to actually protect those devices?
Great. Another question here is, what do you think about AI in helping thwart cyber attacks?
We don't have any choice but to adopt AI. And it comes back to some very basic numbers. if you look at the number of jobs open for cybersecurity globally right now, there's about 4.5 million jobs worldwide. There's only about 5 million cybersecurity professionals worldwide. So we have nearly a 50% rate of people working cybersecurity jobs versus the jobs that are available. So the reality is that is just going to continue to grow. We're going to need more cybersecurity people, but we're not going to have them. So we have to look at some way to better involve technology. The robots are not going to take all of our jobs. Don't worry about that. We have to find some better way to improve our analysis engines so that small group of security analysts and cybersecurity professionals can be more effective at their job. And that's where AI, Gen AI, ML, whatever flavor of that you're looking at is going to be incredibly important, because the more efficient and accurate the analysis of traffic can become, at least in this case, the better we're going to be able to inform the people doing that work on the real threats they're up against. So it's not a matter of will this replace our workers? It absolutely won't. The reality is we're not going to have enough workers. We currently don't, and we will continue to see shortfalls for our lifetimes on cybersecurity workers, and therefore we have to adopt technologies to make them more effective.
Great. Well, we've got time for one more question, Chad, and it's what types of response guidance do NDR technologies provide?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, it depends on the NDR technology. For us, what we typically try to do is identify what the attack is, where the attack is, how it's trying to propagate. So all the details about what's happening. And then we have team members combined with our technology that provide you guidance. So in some cases, it may be quarantine the device so you can keep it in operation and then do a hard reset. In some cases, it may be taking it offline because of an emergency situation. In some cases, it may be sunsetting the device because it's past its state anyway and it's tagged for replacement. So that's the really core part of NDR in terms of being efficient for healthcare environments, is giving you actionable guidance that you can work on that doesn't impact patient care.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Chad. We're coming up to our hour. So if anybody's got any further questions, as you can see from the screen, there is Chad's email address. So please feel free to email him any questions. So thanks again, Chad, for your time today and for a great and informative presentation. I'd like to encourage everyone to visit today's sponsor to learn more about the services they provide to the industry. So please visit Cynerio.com. Now, as promised, the answer to today's trivia question is, of course, Georgia. So congratulations to our winner, Robin Fort in Kansas. Oh, enjoy your AirPods, Robin. And just a quick reminder, you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit from the ACI, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once you've submitted the survey. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. If you missed any of our past webinars, including any by Chad and Cynerio, please visit webinarwednesday.live to view all of our whole webinar archive. We'll be back next week with another webinar and another 10th anniversary prize. So please visit webinarwednesday.live for more details and complimentary registration. So thank you once again all for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.